In 2009, Midway Games Inc., the company that had dominated the American gaming industry since the 1970s, shut its doors. Midway had developed and licensed some of the greatest arcade cabinets and video games of all time. Pac-Man, Galaga, Rampage, Mortal Kombat, and many others can all trace their roots back to this Chicago company. Their games were household names filled with brand icons, recognizable even amongst those who had never played a video game in their lives. However, something, whether it be changing markets, or what the company had become after their glory years in the 80s and 90s, was simply unsustainable for them. Let's take a look back at one of the most iconic, game-changing companies of the past and present of games. This is the history of Midway. Midway as a company began in 1958 as Midway Manufacturing and produced mechanical games for amusement parks. It was founded in Forest Park, Illinois. In 1969, the company was purchased by Bally, a company notable for its slot machines. Together, the pair primarily produced pinball games, as well as some mechanical arcade games such as Sea Devil, before becoming early pioneers into the emerging industry of video arcade cabinets. One of their earliest of these video arcade machines was 1976's Sea Wolf, a digital successor to Sea Devil. One thing that kept Midway ahead of its competitors at that time was a close connection to manufacturers in Japan, especially to Taito. Taito would frequently license their games to Midway so that they could be produced in North America, and in return, Midway would license their games to Taito for the Japanese market. Indeed, Midway's biggest hits during this era were Japanese imports. 1978's Space Invaders, produced by Taito and distributed by Midway, was a breakout success in the States. But nothing cemented arcades into the popular culture more than 1980's Pac-Man. The game, this time a product of Namco, was a smash hit as soon as it was released. There were even songs made about it. As they continued to coast on their Pac-Man fever through the 1980s, things seemed to look up for Midway. Until 1988, Bally sold the entire company over to Williams, a close competitor in the pinball industry. Under Williams, Midway was pushed to the sidelines and made into a new pinball division. Midway wouldn't make another video game for 4 whole years. In the early 90s, the team at Williams decided that arcade games were just a dying fad, and that the core company should be moved in new directions. And so it was Midway who, in 1992, absorbed the entirety of Williams' video game department. This new team quickly began to publish a plethora of new arcade games. Almost as soon as they were allowed to publish again, Midway had hit a second gold mine, one that would start a franchise that would carry them through the decade. An unassuming fighting game quickly developed to compete with Capcom's Street Fighter II. That game was Mortal Kombat. Was groundbreaking to say the least, utilizing digitized graphics of real actors to simulate what was, at the time, extremely realistic gore. So much so that the game was cited in US congressional hearings as an example of the violence being taught to children through video games. Despite the bad press, Mortal Kombat and its sequels are some of the best-selling cabinets not just of the 90s, but ever. The real money from Mortal Kombat had yet to be made. The home console ports were released the following year, 1993, raking in combined millions of dollars, and creating similar controversy. This was unknown territory for Midway. They were an arcade and pinball company first and foremost, and they hadn't even made those ports, they just licensed them out. Console games were Nintendo and Sega's territory. But this proved to be a turning point for the company. The seeds of change were already sown. In 1996, Midway was let off Williams' leash entirely. For the first time since 1969, Midway was its own independent company. And, like a teenager that just moved out of their parents' house, the veteran company felt the need to flex its newfound independence. Pinball was out of fashion now. What was once a lucrative market was now only run on the fumes of fanatics and collectors. No, they learned from Mortal Kombat that the real profits were in the home console industry. And so, Midway quickly dropped its pinball division, And then, in 2001, they left the arcade industry as well, streamlining the company and doubling down on console games. This turned out to be a success for them, a huge success even, so successful that Midway became their own parent company, gobbling up multiple third-party developers to expand their influence on the industry. But, instead of solidifying their growth and expanding their assets, this rampant spending ended up pulling the company down. From 2004 to 2007, sales declined and profit margins shrank. Despite the popularity of their previous games, Midway could not escape economic downfall. And so, in 2009, in the wake of the Great Recession, they quickly sold off most of their subsidiaries and filed for bankruptcy. By 2010, all of their assets were absorbed into Warner Brothers. What was left of this once prestigious industry leader would be turned into NetherRealm Studios, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers Games. NetherRealm is still making games in Chicago to this day.